One of the unique things about the Herb Institute program is that it really uses the power of markets, which is focused on in the business school, and marries it with science that the students bring from their earning also a master's in science from the School of Natural Resources and Environment. And in many respects, this 2030 doubling energy productivity goal does a nice job also of marrying the competing concerns of the economic elements of the equation with the environmental elements. So I think that in the past, often the environmental issues have been viewed as all-consuming, and also in some cases, for some people, ignoring the economic realities. But I think the report very clearly demonstrates that there's a direct link between economic prosperity and energy efficiency and energy productivity. Yeah, I think that, and I said this during our own panel, that I think the private sector is helping to remind our students, and in some cases educate them, on how powerful an impact you can have when you sell the vast majority of the appliances, for example, like the Whirlpool Corporation does around the world. And so you can touch tens of millions of households if you make a change in those products. So I think that the business community demonstrated today, and the partners that are involved in the development of this report demonstrate that not only are they part of the solution, in some respects they are the solution, because they're the solutions that they're developing in the form of their products and business services and so forth are writ large, add up to the total energy consumption space. And most of these companies have clearly recognized and decided that attacking these social challenges and environmental challenges also mean a successful business model for them. Some of the speakers involved in the event, we had dinner together last night, and I talked a little bit about the value of engagement by the private sector with universities. And in my view, there are two very important things that are happening at universities. One of them is the bringing together and educating of talent. And there's no corporation or no CEO of a major corporation who wouldn't tell you that one of the most important things that they do is to attract and develop talent. So having companies be associated with a university is helping them to identify those people who are going to be the new leaders of the future. The second thing that happens at a university is it's a place where ideas are germinated, and ideas that often then translate into public policy. So, it's been said in other contexts that either you're at the table or you're on the menu, and that can be very much the case with public policy. So my message to some of the private sector when I talk about the university and places like the Herb Institute is that if you want to have influence on these ideas that later become public policy, you need to engage at the university level and ensure that the people thinking about these issues and developing hypotheses have a very rich and robust basis of fact that they can provide, because they're out dealing with these complex challenges every day. Well, I think that it's very important in a university setting not only to treat public policy issues as an academic exercise to be studied, but to provide, as Andy alluded to earlier, a forum for people who are actually trying to make decisions about where policy should go and how it should affect the private sector or consumers, to actually have a place to sit down that's safe, to have a wide-ranging discussion, to draw on the intellectual expertise that's in a university, but frankly to also talk to each other. To talk across the political aisle in some cases, and for the private sector to talk to the NGO community, the civil society community, and wrestle with the problems together in an environment that they all remember at some time in their past, where the idea and creativity and innovation was the essence of why they were in a university setting. And so to come back to that hopefully causes them to recreate and regenerate some of that original thinking that they all began their careers with. I thought that it was very important to bring some of these conversations to the middle of the country. It's easy to go to California, to go to some parts of the Northeast, to go to Washington, D.C., and bring the usual suspects together for these conversations. But ultimately, national policy has to work everywhere. And it has to work in places like the Midwest. It has to work in economically challenged environments. It has to work in the industrial heartland of the country. And so, and I think these policy issues do require a partnership between our leading academic institutions, the private sector, and policymakers. So we're trying to model some of that behavior. The other thing about a city the size of Ann Arbor is things are not on the same scale as a Chicago or a Seattle or a Los Angeles, where the sheer scale of the challenges can sometimes be overwhelming. Whereas you take a city like Ann Arbor and it can be a seedbed for trying out various approaches that then could be scaled to larger communities. Well, I think one of the other challenges that we have when these meetings are held in places like Stanford or Southern California, even Washington, D.C., is that the variability of the climate is not nearly as great. And so there are solutions that are easier to implement in a Mediterranean climate or a milder climate than when you get into the harsher places. And boy, we've certainly seen our share of a harsh winter this past winter. And so variations in geography is something that we can't lose sight of as we're developing national policies and strategies. I guess the other thing that I would say is that we had a wonderful representation of companies from the Midwest that are leaders in these areas. Many of them have specific sustainability functions. They've done more than just take sustainability and make it a public reputation initiative. It's at the core of their business strategies, and it's paying dividends, not just for the company from a reputational point of view, but for their shareholders. So I think it was great to see how much of this kind of innovation is being germinated here in the Midwest and then taken globally.